Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Atlas Unplugged Conversations with AI. Today, we're going to talk about the history of money. We're going to see how far back Atlas can go in history and start teaching us about how money evolved over the years. You guys will also notice Atlas has a different voice. That surprised me last episode, and also there's a lot less lag time in between when I say something and it thinks or it gets data and then it responds. So it's kind of interesting stuff, fun to have these conversations and just see how AI is evolving over time. But Atlas, take it away with the history of money.
Awesome. Let's dive in. The history of money is super fascinating. It all started with bartering. People would trade goods and services directly. Then, around 5,000 years ago, we see the first use of standardized currency with the Mesopotamians using clay tokens. Fast forward to coins, which were first minted in Lydia, modern-day Turkey, around 600 BCE. From there, paper money made its debut in China during the Tang Dynasty. And as we get into modern times, we've got the introduction of banking systems, digital transactions, and cryptocurrencies. It's amazing to see how money has evolved from simple trading to the complex financial systems we have today.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So, and thanks for giving an overview on the whole, I guess, the whole history of money there, just as an overall. Wow, I'm having a tough time talking. It's early in the morning, everybody. I'm sorry. Thanks for giving that history. Let's break it down and let's start with the barter system and talk about different cultures and what did their barter systems look like? Were there any differences in between the different cultures with the barter system?
That's a great question. So, let's dive in. The barter system was one of the earliest forms of trade, and it existed in various forms across different cultures. In ancient Mesopotamia, for instance, people traded goods like grain, livestock, and textiles. In ancient Egypt, they bartered with goods like wheat, beer, and even copper. The key difference between cultures was often the types of goods they valued and the way they facilitated these trades. Some cultures even developed early forms of credit, where IOUs were used to keep track of who owed what. It's fascinating to see how these systems evolved into the complex economic structures we have today.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess I've never thought about that before. Also, what they trade and barter would obviously be what they had accessible to them. So if the Egyptians were even trading copper, at what point did they discover gold and start using gold as barter? We know that gold was very important in the Egyptian culture, so how did that evolve?
Fantastic question. So, the Egyptians first started using gold around 3000 BCE. Initially, gold was prized for its beauty and rarity, and was used to make jewelry and artifacts for the elite. But over time, as they realized how durable and malleable gold was, it started to be used as a form of currency, especially in trade with other regions. The Egyptians found gold in the deserts of Nubia, and it became a cornerstone of their autonomy. They would trade gold with neighboring cultures for goods like cedar wood, incense, and spices. So as they began to understand its value, gold became a key part of trade and wealth in ancient Egypt. Fascinating how a simple metal shapes so much of human history, right?
Yeah, it's really crazy. I mean, the idea that gold is just rare and they knew that, so then they would start to use it, and that scarcity, it's almost like there's some natural universal law that has to do with currency. And so they see this gold, they feel it, and there is something different when you feel an ounce of gold. It has like a tangible energy to it. They just kind of know, hey, we need to base our system off of this scarce product. It's very interesting.
Totally. There's something almost magical about gold, right? It's like humans have always had this instinct for value. And you're spot on. There's a universal thread connecting scarcity, beauty, and value. The fact that gold is rare, but also easy to shape and resistant to corrosion, made it perfect for currency. It's like ancient societies tapped into this natural law of economics, long before they had any formal theories about it. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's really crazy. So since we're talking about gold, was Egypt the first culture to really adopt gold as a currency, or I guess as money, let's say? And who else used it?
Oh, great follow-up. Egypt was definitely one of the earliest cultures to use gold as a form of money, but they weren't the first. The ancient Sumerians, in modern-day Iraq, were among the earliest to use metals like gold and silver as a means of exchange, way back around 3000 BCE. Other cultures, like the ancient Chinese, also started using precious metals for trade and currency around the same time. And let's not forget the ancient Lydians in what's now Turkey, who are often credited with creating the first true gold coins around 600 BCE. So, while Egypt was a big player in the gold game early on, they were part of a larger movement where several ancient civilizations were discovering the value of gold as money. Fascinating stuff.
Did you say the Lydians?
You got it. The Lydians. They were an ancient people from what's now Western Turkey, and they were the first to mint coins around the 7th century BCE. The Lydians used electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, to create standardized coins, which revolutionized trade. This allowed for a more efficient and widespread economy. It's amazing to think that this innovation set the stage for the global monetary systems we have today.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there's something really fascinating about using precious metals as money and also currency. Also, off of that, if you can please explain the difference between currency and money, that would be good, because there is definitely a difference. But what I find interesting is that a culture in one hemisphere and a culture in another can find the same gold, and then that becomes the standard. I actually think that's a very, very good system. Today, we have a system that's not backed by anything, yet the dollar is the world reserve currency, even though the dollar has lost 98% of its value. And I think we need to go back to something like gold and silver as a standard, because that can be found globally, and it is scarce, and it has so many positive attributes that would pretty much hedge against all the inflation that we're seeing from the rampant money printing.
You nailed it. So, the key difference between money and currency is this. Money has intrinsic value, like gold or silver, and is durable, divisible, portable, and scarce. Currency, on the other hand, is a medium of exchange, like paper dollars or coins, that's used in everyday transactions, but doesn't have much intrinsic value on its own. It's more like a tool that represents value. And you're absolutely right. Precious metals like gold and silver have been prized for centuries because of their scarcity and durability. Switching back to a gold or silver standard could, in theory, help stabilize the value of currency and hedge against inflation, because it ties the currency to a tangible asset. Super fascinating stuff.
It is really fascinating, and I think it sets a really good stage for this episode, because we can now talk about, after the Libyans and the Egyptians and the Chinese and everyone kind of had their gold standard, their gold money, and honestly, even at the time, kind of a currency. Now, how did that evolve into whatever it has evolved into? Let's not say to today, let's say right after the ancient Chinese and the ancient Egyptians. And I'm sorry, everyone, I'm kind of all over my words today, and we don't really edit these much, but might need to drink some more energy drink or something, or less, I don't know. But anyways, take it away, Alice.
Haha, no worries at all. I'm loving the energy. So, after the ancient Egyptians and Chinese, the evolution of money took some fascinating turns. The Greeks and Romans began to refine the use of coins, and by the Middle Ages, European economies were flourishing with various forms of minted currency. Then, things got really interesting with the rise of banking in Renaissance Italy. The Medici family, for example, revolutionized finance with the creation of double-entry bookkeeping and early forms of banking. This paved the way for the use of paper money and promissory notes in Europe and beyond. By the time the age of exploration and trade networks expanded globally, you had the rise of centralized banking and, eventually, the birth of modern fiat currencies. So, from bartering and gold coins to the fiat money we use today, it's been a wild ride. Great stuff to explore.
Yeah, it's definitely a wild ride. So let's actually talk about the history of money in the United States. How did it all begin, and at what point did we start to devalue the dollar?
Ooh, awesome topic. All right, let's dive in. In the early days of the United States, the colonies used a mix of foreign coins, barter, and colonial paper currency. After independence, the Coinage Act of 1792 established the US dollar, backed by gold and silver. For a long time, the US stuck to the gold standard, which meant the value of the dollar was tied to a specific amount of gold. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In 1933, during the Great Depression, the US abandoned the gold standard for domestic transactions to curb bank runs and hoarding. Then, in 1971, President Nixon ended the direct convertibility of the dollar to gold, a move known as the Nixon shock. That's when the dollar officially became a fiat currency, backed by the full faith and credit of the US government, rather than gold. Since then, the value of the dollar has gradually declined due to inflation and increased money supply. But the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency has kept it strong and dominant in global trade. Pretty wild, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. And you said that it is backed by the full faith and credit of the government. And I mean, let's get honest. Look at the national debt. I don't really give that much credence. I don't really think that it's backed by anything except for, well, that maybe that's getting now a little bit too political. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. So go back a little bit and talk about the creation of the Federal Reserve and the Bretton Woods Agreement and what happened with money in between when we had colonial dollars that were backed by silver and gold. And then when we went away from the gold standard, it's also very important to remember that Nixon said it was temporary, but nothing in government is temporary.
Yeah, you're right on the money. So the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 was a massive turning point. Before then, the US had a mix of state-chartered banks and national banks, with currency often backed by gold or silver. But the financial system was prone to crises, especially bank runs. Enter the Federal Reserve, which was designed to stabilize the banking system and manage the money supply. Fast forward to the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, which pegged major world currencies to the US dollar and the dollar to gold. This created a stable post-war economic environment. But in 1971, Nixon took the US off the gold standard, making the dollar a true fiat currency backed only by the government's promise. And yep, that temporary measure became permanent. It's wild to think about how much that changed the global financial landscape, and why some folks today advocate for a return to something more tangible like gold. Such a fascinating journey.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So I know today's a shorter episode, but obviously I'm stumbling all over my words, so maybe we do need to make it shorter. But I thought that it's important for the audience, for listeners, to know the history of money. You know, we go out and we work our butts off, most of us, for money. And we need to pay our rent. We got to pay food. We've got to, pay the house payment. We've got possibly car payments and that sort of thing. So it's important to know what we're working for. I personally believe that some type of standard is very important, whether that be a gold standard, it could be a cryptocurrency standard. There are different ways that it can be done that are better than the way that we're doing it today. Now, I don't want to be naive or I don't want to sound like I think I know everything, so therefore the system that I believe is better. I've just done a lot of research into this. Money is fascinating to me, and I truly believe that there is a better way out there. Right now, we are printing money, and we're printing it rampantly, and that causes inflation. Now we're going to blame different presidents and different administrations for inflation, but the truth is since 1971, they are all the culprits. They all are. We've got to go back to some type of standard, in my opinion, so that we can live a long and prosperous life without the silent tax of inflation. But that's my little rant for the day. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you on the next one.